The crowd fell silent. Barron Trump's voice shook. "I know what you're thinking," he said, "but you're wrong." Hearts raced as he continued. "Everyone's angry. No one's listening, including you." The audience shifted uneasily. What came next left them speechless. In just 15 minutes, Barron Trump did the unthinkable. He united a divided room. But as applause erupted inside, critics sharpened their knives outside. The real battle was just beginning. The convention center hummed with a nervous energy as Barron Trump approached the podium. Whispers and hushed judgments rippled through the crowd, their eyes fixed on the young man who bore the weight of his family name. The air felt thick with anticipation, a mixture of curiosity and skepticism painting the faces of those gathered. Barron's hands rested lightly on the podium, a stark contrast to the white-knuckled grip many had expected. His demeanor exuded an unexpected calmness, a steadiness that seemed to defy the swirling emotions in the room. The audience held its collective breath, waiting for the familiar Trump bravado to burst forth. Instead, Barron's voice cut through the silence with a quiet intensity. "I know what you expect from me," he began, his words measured and clear. The crowd leaned in, certain they knew what would come next. But Barron wasn't there to meet expectations. His next words shattered preconceptions like glass. "And you're wrong." The silence that followed was deafening. Confusion replaced skepticism as the audience struggled to process this unexpected opening. Barron's gaze swept across the room, his eyes challenging each person to confront their own biases. This was no rehearsed political speech, no carefully crafted performance. It was raw, genuine, and utterly captivating. As the weight of his words settled, a palpable shift occurred in the atmosphere. The polite, measured applause that had greeted his arrival gave way to a tense curiosity. What would this young Trump say next? How would he defy their expectations? Barron let the silence linger, allowing the gravity of his opening statement to sink in. It was a technique reminiscent of seasoned orators, yet there was no artifice in his approach. He spoke from a place of genuine reflection, his words born from lived experience rather than political calculation. The audience found themselves on unfamiliar ground. They had come expecting a continuation of the Trump legacy, perhaps a fiery defense of his father's policies or an attack on political opponents. Instead, they were confronted with something entirely different, a young man speaking his own truth, unafraid to challenge the very crowd he stood before. As Barron continued, the quiet, lingering uncertainty that had filled the room began to transform. The skepticism that had greeted him started to melt away, replaced by a growing sense of respect. Here was someone who refused to be defined by others' expectations, who dared to speak authentically in a world of carefully crafted soundbites. The room's newfound respect hung in the air, fragile as spun glass. But Barron wasn't finished shattering expectations. His next words would cut deeper than anyone could have anticipated, exposing raw nerves long buried beneath political rhetoric. "I'm tired," Barron said, his voice barely above a whisper. The microphone carried his words to every corner of the hall. "And I know you're tired too." A collective intake of breath swept through the audience. This wasn't the polished speech they'd expected. Barron's eyes scanned the crowd, taking in their startled expressions. "We're all exhausted by the anger, the constant fighting," he continued, his voice gaining strength. "When was the last time you sat down for dinner with someone who voted differently than you? When did we stop seeing each other as people and start seeing each other as enemies?" The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some avoided eye contact, while others leaned forward, hanging on every word. Barron painted a vivid picture of a nation torn apart. He spoke of Thanksgiving dinners ruined by political arguments, of childhood friendships dissolved over social media posts. His words carried the weight of someone who had watched it all unfold from a unique vantage point. "I've seen families torn apart," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "I've watched friends become strangers over a single election. Is this really who we want to be?" The silence in the room was deafening. No one coughed, no one whispered. They were transfixed by this unexpected mirror being held up to their fractured society. Barron's voice grew stronger, fueled by a quiet intensity. "We talk about making America great, but how can we do that when we can't even talk to our neighbors? When we've forgotten how to listen?" He paused, letting the question hang in the air. The audience held its breath, caught between defensiveness and a dawning recognition of hard truths. "I'm not here to tell you who's right or wrong," Barron continued. "I'm here to ask, what kind of country do we want to be? One that's united by our shared hopes, or one that's divided by our fears?" With each word, Barron chipped away at the preconceptions the audience had built around him. This wasn't a rehashing of familiar talking points or a charm offensive. It was raw, unfiltered, and deeply personal. The Trump-shaped box they'd mentally placed him in began to crumble. Here was no puppet parroting a party line, but a young man grappling with the complexities of a nation in turmoil. The room crackled with tension as Barron's gaze swept across the sea of faces before him. His eyes settled on the front row, where politicians sat rigid, their practiced smiles frozen in place. The air grew thick, heavy with anticipation. Barron's next words would shatter the carefully constructed facades of those who claimed to lead. "How many of you," he began, his voice steady but tinged with sadness, "have actually changed your mind about something important in the last year?" The silence that followed was deafening. It stretched on, second after agonizing second, as the weight of the question sank in. Politicians squirmed in their seats, suddenly fascinated by their shoes or the ceiling tiles. Anything to avoid meeting Barron's piercing gaze. Journalists' pens hovered above their notepads, suspended in midair. How could they possibly spin this moment? What angle could soften the blow of such a direct challenge to the very core of political stubbornness? Barron let the discomfort linger, forcing each person in the room to confront their own rigid beliefs. In that pause, the air grew thick with the ghosts of missed opportunities and discarded empathy. The weight of stubborn ideologies pressed down on shoulders, making even the act of breathing feel like a monumental task. Eyes darted nervously around the room, searching for someone, anyone, brave enough to break the silence. But no voice rose to answer Barron's challenge. The quiet stretched on, becoming a living thing that filled every corner of the convention center. In that moment of collective self-reflection, a subtle shift began to take place. The polished veneer of political confidence cracked, revealing glimpses of vulnerability beneath. Some faces flushed with shame, others paled with the sudden realization of their own inflexibility. Barron's question hung in the air like a mirror, forcing each person to confront their own reflection. How many had truly listened to opposing viewpoints with an open mind? How many had allowed new information to challenge their deeply held beliefs? The room held its breath, waiting for someone to step forward, to admit to growth and change. But the silence persisted, a damning indictment of a political culture that valued winning over understanding. As the moments ticked by, the atmosphere in the room shifted. What had started as discomfort began to evolve into something more profound. A collective realization dawned. This young man, whom many had dismissed, was forcing them to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and the state of discourse in their nation. The silence that followed Barron's challenge didn't last long. As his words sank in, a subtle shift rippled through the crowd. Hearts raced, not with indignation, but with an unfamiliar sensation. Was it hope? A veteran journalist in the third row slowly lowered his pen, lost in thought. His fingers, usually flying across his notepad, lay still. For the first time in decades, he found himself without words to capture the moment unfolding before him. In the front row, a senator leaned forward, brow furrowed in unexpected contemplation. Her carefully crafted mask of political neutrality cracked, revealing a flicker of genuine emotion. She caught herself, straightening her spine, but the damage was done. Something had changed. Whispers began to spread through the convention center like tendrils of smoke. Not the usual criticism or cynical commentary, but something different. Reluctant agreement, grudging respect. The air buzzed with a strange electricity as people turned to their neighbors, eyes wide with surprise. Outside the walls of the convention center, a storm was brewing. Social media exploded, clips of Barron's speech spreading like wildfire across platforms. Hashtags like #BarronSpeaks and #UnexpectedUnity began trending within minutes. The internet, usually a battleground of opposing OGs, found itself united in shock and fascination. Comment sections filled with a cacophony of voices. Some lashed out, clinging desperately to their preconceptions. Others expressed stunned disbelief, struggling to reconcile this new image of Barron with their long-held assumptions. But underneath the chaos, a current of grudging respect began to flow. "Did you see that?" one user wrote. "I never thought I'd say this, but I think I agree with him." Another chimed in, "Is this real? Or are we in some parallel universe where politicians actually make sense?" As the online world grappled with this unexpected moment, political analysts scrambled to interpret its implications. News channels erupted with heated debates, each pundit trying to outdo the others with their hot takes. "This wasn't just a speech," one commentator declared, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "This was a moment. He's young, he's fresh, People are listening in a way they haven't in years. Others were more cautious, warning against reading too much into a single address. But even the most cynical observers couldn't deny the impact of Barron's words. Something had shifted in the political landscape, and no one was quite sure where the pieces would fall. As the hours ticked by, the ripples of Barron's speech spread far beyond the convention center walls. In living rooms across the country, families found themselves engaged in conversations they'd been avoiding for years. Dinner tables became battlegrounds of a different kind, not for angry arguments, but for hesitant attempts at understanding. The impact wasn't limited to ordinary citizens. In a surprising turn of events, Michelle Obama unexpectedly praised Barron's message during a speaking engagement. Her words sent shockwaves through both sides of the political aisle. "I respect when young people step up and speak for themselves," she stated, her voice carrying a note of genuine admiration. "What he said about listening, about not making assumptions, we could all learn something from that." The former First Lady's endorsement added fuel to the already raging fire of public discourse. It forced many to confront their own biases, challenging the notion that wisdom and insight could only come from expected sources. Yet, as with any seismic shift in public opinion, resistance remained. Critics sharpened their knives, ready to tear down this unexpected messenger of unity. Some dismissed Barron's speech as a well-crafted PR move, a calculated attempt to rebrand the Trump name for a new generation. "Don't be fooled," one pundit warned, his face twisted with skepticism. "This is just another Trump trick. They're adapting, evolving, but the core remains the same." The division in public opinion was stark. Social media became a battleground of competing hashtags. #Barron for president clashed with #Trump trickery. Memes and video edits flooded feeds, some celebrating Barron as a beacon of hope, others twisting his words into sinister conspiracies. Yet, amidst the chaos and conflicting narratives, an undeniable truth emerged. In just 24 hours, perceptions had shifted more than anyone thought possible. The rigid lines that had defined American politics for so long began to blur, if only slightly. A surprising statistic emerged from a hastily conducted poll. 47% of respondents who identified as strongly opposed to the Trump family admitted to feeling conflicted or more open-minded after hearing Barron's speech. It wasn't a landslide, but in a landscape of entrenched opinions, it was nothing short of revolutionary. The silence that followed Barron's speech was shattered by an unexpected voice. In a dimly lit auditorium, far from the chaos of the convention center, Michelle Obama stood at a podium, her words about to send shockwaves through the political landscape. The former First Lady had been invited to speak at a college event, a routine engagement that suddenly became anything but ordinary. As she fielded questions from eager students, one brave soul dared to ask her thoughts on Barron Trump's recent speech. The room fell deathly quiet, the air thick with anticipation. Everyone leaned forward, expecting a sharp rebuke of the Trump name. Michelle Obama took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the crowd. When she finally spoke, her words left the audience breathless. "I may not agree with his father on much," she began, her voice steady and clear, "but I respect when young people step up and speak for themselves." The reaction was instant and visceral. Gasps echoed through the auditorium, followed by a smattering of surprised applause. Some students sat frozen in their seats, struggling to process what they'd just heard. Others whispered furiously to their neighbors, disbelief etched on their faces. As Michelle Obama continued, her words carried the weight of a seismic shift. "We could all learn something from that," she added, her tone both firm and fair. The statement hung in the air, a challenge to everyone present to reconsider their own preconceptions. Within minutes, the internet exploded once again. Social media platforms lit up with the news, Michelle Obama's name trending alongside Barron Trump's. The unlikely pairing sent shockwaves through both sides of the political aisle. Supporters and critics alike scrambled to make sense of this unexpected twist. Political analysts rushed to their keyboards, frantically rewriting their takes on Barron's speech. The endorsement from such a prominent figure with a strong following had suddenly reframed the entire conversation. Discussions about unity and the importance of listening to diverse perspectives began to dominate news cycles. As the story spread, the reaction grew increasingly polarized. Some praised Michelle Obama for her willingness to acknowledge Barron's message, seeing it as a beacon of hope in a divided landscape. Others lashed out, accusing her of giving legitimacy to the Trump family. The comments sections of news articles became battlegrounds, with heated debates raging into the night. Yet amidst the chaos, something remarkable was happening. Political lines, once so firmly drawn, began to blur. People who had never agreed on anything found themselves cautiously nodding along to the same sentiment. For a brief, shining moment, the possibility of genuine dialogue seemed within reach. The whispers started softly, a mere ripple in the sea of newfound optimism. But they grew, swelling into a roar that threatened to wash away any chance of reconciliation. As Barron's words echoed beyond the convention center walls, a storm of criticism erupted, threatening to drown out his message of unity. Cable news networks, once united in their shock, now split like fracturing ice. Some praised Barron's raw honesty, hailing it as a breath of fresh air in the stagnant political atmosphere. Others cried foul, their voices dripping with suspicion. "It's all a PR stunt," they hissed, their words seeping into the minds of viewers like poison. Social media platforms became battlegrounds, each tweet a weapon, each post a shield. Supporters and detractors clashed in digital warfare, tearing apart Barron's every syllable. The unity he had called for seemed to slip further away with each passing moment, lost in a sea of accusations and counter-accusations. Conspiracy theories spread like wildfire, fueled by the dry tinder of skepticism. "He's being used," insisted some, their eyes gleaming with the fervor of those who believe they've uncovered a great deception. "A pawn in a bigger game," others agreed, nodding sagely as they wove intricate webs of supposed manipulation. Political strategists, like vultures circling a carcass, descended upon Barron's speech. They dissected every word, every pause, every subtle shift in tone. Their eyes narrowed as they searched for hidden agendas, convinced that such sincerity must be a mask for something more sinister. The backlash was immediate and intense. Critics questioned not just Barron's sincerity, but his very right to speak. "Who is he to talk about unity?" they sneered, their words dripping with disdain. "His last name disqualifies him from making such statements," others insisted, their voices thick with skepticism towards political dynasties. As the debate raged on, it became clear that Barron's words had transcended typical political discourse. They had entered the realm of cultural conversation, sparking fierce arguments in living rooms and coffee shops across the nation. Every aspect of his delivery, his appearance, his background was scrutinized under the harsh light of public opinion. Yet in their fervor to discredit him, the critics inadvertently proved Barron's point about division. Their rush to judgment, their refusal to listen, their immediate assumption of ill intent, all of it highlighted the very problems Barron had addressed in his speech. Barron Trump's words reverberated far beyond the convention center, striking a chord deep within the nation's soul. His assertion that assumptions blind us to truth forced listeners to confront their own biases. The air crackled with tension as people grappled with his challenge. Could they truly listen to change their minds? Experts whispered of long-term ripples, predicting a shift in political discourse. But as night fell, storm clouds gathered. Critics sharpened their knives, ready to tear down this unexpected messenger of unity. The question hung heavy into the air. Would America heed the call to bridge its deepest divides, or retreat to the safety of familiar battle lines? In living rooms across the country, families sat in uncomfortable silence, the weight of Barron's words pressing down on long-avoided conversations. The future trembled on a knife's edge, waiting for the nation's response.